All right, so this is what I committed to memory in order to get a 90% on the workflow / process automation section of the Salesforce Administrator Exam. So if you can just remember these few things and just commit it to memory, I think if you're struggling on this section, you can probably increase your score by like 20%. So I'm just going to go through it really fast. First of all, flow terminology, right? People talk about Salesforce flow, people talk about workflow rules, and people talk about flow. Now, what are these three things? Because it can be confusing. So just know, Salesforce flow, first of all, that's just a word. That's just a term that people use. It's not a technical thing that you can do in Salesforce. Salesforce flow is just a blanket term to talk about both flow and process builder. It's a type of automation within Salesforce, right? So you're never going to see a button called Salesforce flow. It's just a word. So that's the first thing to know. And then workflow rules are one of the three major automation tools. They're the weakest and oldest of all. They're kind of just the original, very basic type of action. And then flow, on the other hand, is the standard right now. It's the best, strongest, fastest form of automation in Salesforce. So that's just flow, right? So that's the three things. Salesforce flow, word, workflow rules, old, simple, and then flow, new, awesome, big, complex. So like I said, these workflow rules are old, and so are process builders. So they're kind of a step up from workflow rules. They're more complex, but now flow accounts for all of the functionality of process builders and workflow rules plus more. So both of these tools, workflow rules and process builders, are getting sunset. Goodbye, they're going away. You're not going to be able to make them anymore. You're going to have to convert old ones into flows, stuff like that. Only thing you got to know about workflow rules is that they kind of go through this. This is the path they go through. You know, they evaluate criteria. Should we start this or not? Rule criteria. Does it meet the criteria for us to do our actions that we want to do? And there's only one set, basically, right? So whereas in flows, you have lots of different criteria you could set to do different actions, and do I want to do this, or do I want to do that, do I want to do different paths? Workflow rules, one path, are we going to do it or not? And then there's actions, and then time-dependent, time-triggered actions that you can do at a delay if you want as well. But basically, you know, whether it's an immediate action or a later action, there's only 4 things that the workflow rule can do. There's 4 actions. You can create a task, you can send an email, you can update a field, and you can send an outbound message. That's it. Only 4 things you can do. Now, with the field updates, they have to be a record. So basically, you can update a field on the record that triggered the workflow rule, or it can update a field on a related record, right? So if there's a record related via lookup relationship or master detail relationship, you can do that as well. But that's it. So whereas a flow, you can update any record anywhere as long as you know how to find it, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be related. So like I said, flow's more complex, workflow rule, very straightforward and simple. Now, like I said, flows can do everything and more that process builders and workflow rules can do. Process builders can do pretty much everything a workflow rule can do except send outbound messages. That's the one thing that workflow rules can do that process builders cannot. Flows can now send outbound messages. So basically, rule of thumb for this whole section, right? You know, you can look through all this stuff and remember it, but if a process builder can do it, a flow can do it too, right? So you should never be saying that process builder is the best option for something if flow is also an option, basically, right? So on the exam, if you have to choose between flow and process builder, always choose flow. And if there's like multiple options, if process builder is one of them, then flow definitely is one of the options too. Do you know what I'm saying here? So anyway, just to know that that's kind of how this works. Yeah, so this is really the big stuff. Now, there's a few other things that you should remember. Order of execution on a save. VAWP, VAAWPE. Now, this is kind of a simplified version of the order of execution, but this is all you have to know for the admin exam. Basically, when you press save, what happens? Validation rules are fired first. Are we going to block this save right off the bat or no? And then they allow the save, cool. Then it goes through assignment rules, auto response rules, then workflow rules, then processes, which processes refer to both flow and process builder, any of those, and then finally escalation rules. So yeah, like I said, just know that general order of execution. Now, last things, leads and cases. Assignment rules and auto response rules are both things that can be configured for both leads and cases as they come in. And escalation rules, however, are specific only to cases. So just know, like, assignment rules, auto response rules, and escalation rules are automation that are kind of specific to leads and cases, but escalation rules only apply to cases, right? It's like, has this case been open for too long? Stuff like that. Then we escalate it. So that's pretty simple. And then last thing, approval process, just know this is how they work. Submit for approval, go through the entry criteria. Are we gonna run this approval process? If yes, then initial submission actions, lock down the record, and those actions are the same as the workflow rule for actions, right? So create task, send an email, update a field, send an outbound message. That's all you can do. Plus lock the record down so that people don't update it until it's approved or denied. And then there's approval steps, which is like, who is this? Who's the approver for this? Who are we sending it to? When? Why? Whatever. And then they approve or deny it. And then there are approval actions based on those outcomes. Once again, the 4 workflow rule actions. So yeah, that's really the big stuff. Like I said, if you can just remember all this, then you'll be really well off. Just knowing the terminology and where everything fits is really good, right? So just knowing, workflow rules and like the process that things are taking, right? We evaluate criteria, we evaluate rule criteria, maybe we do actions, and these are the action options that we have. So yeah, like once again, flows and process builders have way more options of actions and workflow rules. Flows can send Apex actions. They can do a bunch of different custom stuff. And I didn't really talk about this, but scheduled triggered flows versus record triggered flows. There is such a thing as a scheduled path in a record triggered flow, where you can, after the flow is triggered by some field update or whatever it is, then in addition to any immediate path, you can set scheduled paths that will wait and then do those paths after a certain amount of time has passed. That's different than a scheduled triggered flow, because a scheduled triggered flow, that just means it's happening at the same time on a schedule, right? So maybe Tuesdays at 9 p.m., it's always going to run this flow. That's what a scheduled triggered flow is. A scheduled path on a flow is still part of a record triggered flow, but it waits a certain amount of time. Now you can have scheduled paths on other types of flows, I do believe, but just know that a scheduled path happens after a flow is already triggered. And a scheduled triggered flow just is triggered on a schedule. So anyway, that's probably plenty. Like I said, just knowing this stuff will be huge for you. It's very simple. There's not a whole lot more that you have to know to pass the admin exam than just what's on this page. All right, hope that helps you out.